Nick, let's talk about the Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders, really a great offseason. I think we've seen a lot of change for the Raiders, a lot of exciting stuff going on. But I think rather than additions, rather than all of the great stuff that this Raiders team has picked up, whether through draft or free agency, one of their biggest moves is somebody that they subtracted. I'm Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. As I alluded to, Nick, one of the big moves this offseason for the Raiders is a guy that they have moved off from. Not necessarily the person in particular, it's the mentality they have now, their ability to make a change and not have to stick with something. Let's get on into the article and we can talk more about this all on the other side. This is from over on A to Z Sports. It says, on Tuesday, the Raiders and the rest of the NFL cut their rosters down from 90 to 53, cutting 37 players or more. The Raiders had some difficult decisions to make, but it's interesting they put defensive tackle Byron Young on the initial 53-man roster. Young, a Josh McDaniels pick, has not been good, and he struggled in the run game during the preseason despite getting a sack. However, he's already been replaced. The thought is the Raiders placed him on the initial 53 so that they could allow him to seek a better situation for himself, and if not, they could just come back. He could come back to the Raiders on practice squad. But on Wednesday, the Raiders released Young and replaced him with Jonah Lalulu. Probably butchered that one. But this is a former Oklahoma Sooner defensive tackle. The Raiders also claimed Thomas Harper off waivers, a safety from Notre Dame. Young just hasn't shown enough improvement over the last few years. Now, I think this is a key here, Nick, as I alluded to. The Raiders' mentality to not have to stick with guys. They're moving on from people, getting rid of that sunk cost fallacy. Just because you got a draft pick in a guy doesn't mean you got to stick with him. I think this is a great mentality by the Raiders going forward. I'm curious what your thoughts are, Nick. But before we get to you, Raiders fans, in the comment section below, the season just a week away. We got a little bit of rest. We got some college football to watch, and then the real deal starts. So before the season starts, you've seen all the preseason games now. You've seen everybody pan out. You know what the 53 is. Let us know, what do you think the Raiders' record will be this year in the comment section below. I think it's going to be a big year for them, so let us know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. But, Nick, what are your thoughts on this move by the Raiders?
So I think there's a couple things to unpack here, and I agree with you. I think it shows a change in leadership and a change in mindset. It is very rare to have a third-round pick to be cut not even 2 years into his career from his initial drafting team. That's very rare. It's very uncommon. It's almost unusual. Teams don't like to publicly do that because it usually just admits, hey, we totally screwed up. And even with regime changes, teams still don't like to do it, right? Just because it's ugly, it's an embarrassment, right? It just doesn't look good optically in terms of PR and things like that. But I think this is showing that Telesco and Antonio Pierce are like, hey, listen, we don't care about that stuff. We got to make sure we right this ship here because we got to get rid of anybody who's dragging us down. And look, nothing against Young as a person. Obviously, I don't want to demean him too much. We try and be very positive on the show. But his numbers, frankly, were quite terrible. If you look at last season, his PFF grade, he graded out overall at 45, run defense at 45, pass rush at 53. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's been a while since school. All three of those are failing grades, right? How about preseason? Is he getting better, right? That was his rookie year, right? Maybe he's getting better, right? New coaching staff, we're expecting a big leap forward. Overall, he graded out at a 50, run defense still a 45, pass rush is a 62, and that's with a sack. PFF heavily grades sacks and turnovers. So really, pass rush grade is 62. You get rid of that sack, it was a lot of probably 50 minus. So again, not so good here for Young, of course, being productive for the Las Vegas Raiders this season. You got to, I agree with what you said. You can't let the sunk cost fallacy sit in. You got to trim the fat where you can and make the best moves for your team. Because even though moving off of Young is not going to make a huge change in terms of the talent level of the roster. No, right? He's just not. He went from a guy who probably wasn't going to play very much. Now he's off the team, right? So bringing a different depth piece like the Raiders obviously already did. But what it does is it sends a message. It's like, listen, we don't care if you were a first-round pick, third-round pick, fifth-round pick. We don't care if you're 1 year into your team-friendly rookie deal or you're the last year of your mega deal as a veteran. We care about how good you produce on the field, how good of a football player you are, what value you provide this team. I think this is a powerful message to send throughout the entire Las Vegas Raiders organization. And we talked about a lot this offseason, the right moves from a leadership perspective Antonio Pierce has made. There's been a little bit of a lull here recently with that. I think a lot of the energy has kind of died down with the disappointment with Aiden O'Connell not earning the starting job, going with Gardner Minshew, who we'll have to see how that all shakes out. But I think it's very clear, at least right now, the quarterback of the future is a very real question for the Las Vegas Raiders. So a lot of that question marks with Antonio Pierce has kind of come out a little bit. I think this move will put some of that to bed in terms of he's a guy that understands he's there to build the culture, turn this into a winning culture, a winning environment, and moves like this will help with that.
Yeah, Nick, and you bring up quarterback play, and that kind of segues exactly into what I want to talk about. Is there's some really famous examples of just what the Raiders have done here throughout history. I want to bring up the Arizona Cardinals when they picked Josh Rosen early on. That was a first-round pick, high first-round pick they selected on the guy. I know his top 5 pick. I want to say it was really high up there. I can't remember exactly where he was, but that's besides the point. The point was they invested a ton of draft capital in Rosen. Very quickly, regime change, some things changed. They realized he wasn't the guy. They decided to move off of him. And I'm not saying Kyler Murray is going to be the future and the savior of the Arizona Cardinals. That's not my point. The point is they moved off Rosen, and quickly you see him flame out of the NFL. He's no longer on any roster. He's not doing anything, big time. You don't really even, I don't know what he's doing at all anymore. He's a non-factor in the NFL. And that was a good decision. Even though they put a lot of capital into a guy like Josh Rosen, 3rd-round draft pick for the Raiders, that was a lot of capital they put into a guy. If it's not working, you got to move off of them, and sometimes just not wasting your time, not dwelling on what could have been, is the most important move here. So I like the Raiders are moving forward, and that could be attributed to their quarterback situation as well. They're not wasting the time. They're not gonna dwell on what could have been. They're going to move forward. They're going to put a guy out there who they think is going to be serviceable. Maybe Aiden O'Connell's not the future. Maybe Minshew's not the future. And they're going to go say, hey, next year, we're going to go hit the quarterback button again and see if we can find our guy. But I think the Raiders are showing they know what they're doing, and they aren't going to dwell on the past. And I think that's really good for the future of the program.
Yeah, and just one final point there. I think you hit on something very important, is that Antonio Pierce hasn't changed, right? There's going to be some question in my mind as he goes through a camp and a preseason, he goes through game planning, getting ready for the regular season, first-time head coach. Is he going to change from the full-on, full-scale accountability culture guy we saw all offseason, what we saw the final games for the Raiders last season? Was that going to change? Was the head coaching position going to eventually wear him down and break his mentality? And this move is no, it's not the case. He is still 100% focused on rebuilding this Raiders culture. We talked about it a lot. It's exactly what the Raiders need. They've got talent, of course, at a number of positions. I think this move, will not colossal in terms of on-the-field impact, will have a positive impact in terms of resetting the culture in the Raiders locker room. And I think in the long run, it will look like a really smart decision.